Ex-wife abandoned our kids at my door to party with friends. I filed for full custody, and now everyone is cutting her off. My ex-wife, let's call her Tessa, 36 years old, and I, 37, ended our marriage about 2 years ago. We had been together for nearly 12 years, with 10 of those years as husband and wife. Together, we share 2 kids, a 7-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son. At the moment, we're gearing up for a custody battle because I've decided to fight for full custody of both children. There are a lot of reasons behind this decision, but the final straw came from a recent incident that made me realize I can't trust her anymore, not even a little. Here's what happened. I was heading to a work event, and it was Tessa's turn to have the kids. Per our custody arrangement, we split time equally. Half the month the kids are with me, and the other half, they're with her. When something unexpected comes up, and one of us can't watch the kids, we usually ask the other to step in. But last Friday, Tessa was fully aware I had this work event, one hosted by my boss, that I absolutely couldn't miss. I even made sure to tell her beforehand that I wouldn't be available if she needed help with the kids that day. She seemed fine with it at the time, agreeing to take care of them. Fast forward to the day of the event, and while I was driving, she started blowing up my phone with calls. I ignored them at first, figuring they weren't urgent, but the non-stop ringing made me pull over to see what was going on. That's when she dropped a bombshell. She was standing outside my house with the kids, claiming she had an emergency and couldn't take them with her. She demanded I come back home to watch them because her babysitter wasn't answering. Now, I was already frustrated because I'd told her ahead of time that I had this event and wouldn't be able to step in. Still, she insisted it was urgent and told me I had to come home. I tried reasoning with her, explaining that it wasn't possible for me to just bail on work. But mid-argument, she hung up on me, saying she didn't have time to waste talking and had to leave for her so-called emergency. I tried calling her back several times, but she wouldn't answer. Left with no other choice, I turned my car around and headed home. There was no way I was going to leave my kids standing there by themselves, they're far too young for that. But when I pulled into the driveway and saw them standing outside the house, looking confused and lost, my frustration turned to anger. The least she could have done was wait until I got home before taking off. I asked the kids how long they'd been waiting, and they said their mom left right after hanging up the phone with me. She'd told them to wait outside until I got back. Hearing that just blew my mind. Up until then, I thought the one thing we both agreed on was how much we cared about our kids, but I guess I was wrong. Once we were inside, the kids settled into their usual routines, but I was still fuming. I had to call my coworkers and explain why I was missing such an important event. It was humiliating and frustrating because this could have all been avoided if Tessa had just planned better. And honestly, this wasn't the first time something like this happened. Over the past few months, she'd started dropping the kids off unexpectedly on days when it was her turn with them. Usually, it was because she wanted to hang out with her friends, which annoyed me to no end. I couldn't understand why she couldn't stick to her plans or at least give me a heads up. I'd brought it up with her multiple times, but she didn't seem to care how her actions affected me, or anyone else, for that matter. It wasn't like I didn't want to spend time with my kids, I love them more than anything. But her habit of dropping them off at the last minute was throwing my life into chaos. If I was going to be the one constantly caring for them, I figured they might as well live with me full-time. At least then, I wouldn't have to deal with her unpredictable behavior. Last Friday, though, was the first time her actions caused me to miss something important. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, thinking maybe she really did have an emergency. After all, I didn't want to believe she'd deliberately sabotage me like that. But later that evening, I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw a post from her that completely changed everything. There she was, smiling in a photo with a group of her friends at a club. One of them was showing off a diamond ring, clearly celebrating an engagement. It was obvious that this was no emergency, just a party she didn't want to miss. And she knew that if she'd been honest with me, I wouldn't have agreed to drop everything to take care of the kids. So she lied, making me miss a work event so she could go out and have fun. It felt incredibly unfair, and by this point, I'd already been thinking about how this sort of thing had become a pattern with Tessa lately. I decided it was time to take action. I called my babysitter and, thankfully, she was available and agreed to come over within 15 minutes. I offered her extra pay for the last-minute request, and she didn't mind helping out. Once she arrived, I headed out to the club where Tessa and her friends were. It was only a few minutes away, so I got there quickly. Luck was on my side because, even in the crowded space, I spotted Tessa and her group almost immediately. I walked straight over to them, and that's when Tessa noticed me. Her expression shifted to nervousness in an instant, though she tried to play it off with a forced smile. Before I could say much, she started rambling, admitting that what she'd done wasn't right. She explained she just really wanted to be there for her friends and hoped I'd understand why she lied. But I wasn't having any of it. I ignored her excuses and turned to her friends instead. I told them how wonderful it was that Tessa had formed such a strong bond with them, so much so that she was willing to sacrifice time with her kids to be with them. I made it clear this wasn't an isolated incident. Ever since she started working at her new job, her priorities had changed. Her new friends, all women under 30 who clearly didn't share the same responsibilities as her, seemed to have completely taken over her life. Then I went on to say something I could tell made everyone uncomfortable. I revealed how Tessa had lied to me earlier that day, claiming there was an emergency just so she could come here. I told them she'd dropped the kids off at my house and hadn't even waited for me to get back before taking off, leaving our kids to stand outside alone. I made a point of mentioning how lucky we were to live in a safe neighborhood because otherwise, who knows what could have happened to them. I ended by sarcastically congratulating her friends for becoming her top priority in life. The group was visibly uneasy, and Tessa just hung her head in shame, staring at the floor without saying a word. Once I was done venting, I left the club and drove back home. When I got home, I felt a little better after getting that off my chest. But as I sat there, I started seriously considering filing for full custody. Before making that decision, though, I decided to talk to my kids. That turned out to be the best thing I could have done because, without that conversation, I wouldn't have learned the full truth about how they'd been treated while living with Tessa these past few months. I casually asked them how they felt about spending time at their mom's house, trying to gauge if they enjoyed it or felt comfortable there. I figured if they had positive things to say, I'd reconsider filing for full custody. But their answers shocked me. They said it didn't really matter to them because, most of the time, their mom wasn't even around. From the way they described it, they spent more time with the babysitter than with Tessa herself. Apparently, she was either busy with work or out with friends most of the time. On days when the babysitter wasn't available, she would simply drop them off at my house, something I was already well aware of. But hearing it from my kids hit differently. They said they hardly saw her at all since she started her new job and made this new group of friends. The whole point of shared custody is for both parents to spend quality time with their kids. If Tessa wasn't interested in that, it made sense to pursue full custody. It would be more consistent and convenient for everyone. That conversation with my kids solidified my decision. That night, I contacted my lawyer, and within a few days, we filed the petition. Yesterday, Tessa was served the papers, and to my surprise, she seemed genuinely shocked. I'm not sure why she didn't see it coming. After I confronted her at the club, she hadn't reached out to me at all, not to apologize or even to explain herself. The only thing she'd done was remove me from all her social media accounts, which didn't bother me since I already knew what she'd been up to. Even though it was her turn to have the kids, she hadn't shown up to take them, further proving how little she cared. I honestly couldn't understand why she was surprised that I was filing for custody. But after she got the papers, she finally decided to call me, and, of course, it was just to argue. Tessa called me not long after being served with the custody papers. She started off by saying she had just needed some time to cool down after the incident at the club. That struck me as absurd. Somehow, after all that had happened, she thought she was the one who deserved to feel angry or upset. She insisted that just because she'd taken a little time for herself, I had no right to file for full custody. That's when I told her I had spoken to the kids. I let her know I was fully aware that she hadn't been spending much time with them. I pointed out how her priorities had clearly shifted and said I wasn't sure if she was going through a midlife crisis or what, but I wasn't going to let our kids suffer because of it. I told her that everything that had happened recently was the final straw for me, and I intended to ensure the kids stayed with me. If she was lucky, she might get visitation rights. Once she realized I had spoken to the kids and knew the truth, her demeanor changed. She dropped the combative tone and started trying to reason with me. She apologized, admitting she hadn't been spending enough time with the kids. Then she explained how she'd gotten swept up in her new job and friends, wanting to enjoy herself before she got too old. She said meeting those young women at work had made her feel alive again, but she had forgotten they didn't have the same responsibilities she did. She called it a wake-up call, saying she was ready to make changes and become a better parent. I told her that was great if she was serious about it, but in the meantime, the kids needed stability, and that meant staying with me. I explained that full custody would be the best arrangement for now. If she truly turned things around, we could revisit the situation in the future. For now, though, I couldn't trust her to prioritize the kids or to create a stable environment for them. She could have visitation rights, but that was as far as I was willing to go. When she realized I wasn't budging, she started crying. She said everything was happening all at once, and it was too much for her to handle. She blamed me for confronting her in front of her friends at the club, saying I should have waited until the next day to let off steam. Apparently, since that night, her friends had distanced themselves from her. Some of them had even stopped speaking to her altogether, saying they couldn't support the choices she had made. She admitted they'd started to view her differently, and honestly, I couldn't blame them. Tessa kept emphasizing how unfair it all was, that I was punishing her too harshly for what she called one tiny mistake. Losing her friends and now facing the possibility of losing custody of the kids felt like too much for her. She said she'd already learned her lesson and begged me to give her another chance. I reminded her that my only concern was what was best for our kids. I told her I'd already made up my mind, and while I didn't want to put the kids through the stress of another legal battle, this was about ensuring their well-being. She started yelling at me, accusing me of trying to ruin her life. She said she just wanted to feel young again and admitted she'd made a mistake, but she was adamant that she didn't deserve to lose custody over it. At that point, I felt like she was being childish, so I ended the call. But soon after, the texts started pouring in. She apologized again, saying she was truly sorry and promised to do better. She told me she wouldn't even see her friends anymore if that's what it took, and she vowed never to abandon the kids again. Since then, she's been texting me nonstop, and honestly, it's making me question myself. I know filing for full custody is probably the best decision for the kids and the most practical solution for me. But now I'm starting to wonder if I'm being too harsh. Tessa messed up, sure, but as parents, don't we all make mistakes sometimes? The question is whether this was a forgivable mistake or if there's a real risk of it happening again. I've spoken to my lawyer and my parents about this, but I still feel conflicted. My only goal is to do what's best for the kids, but right now, I'm not sure what that is. I'd really appreciate hearing your thoughts. Am I the jerk for filing for full custody after my ex-wife lied about having an emergency to avoid looking after our kids? There's been a lot of speculation about why Tessa and I got divorced, so let me clear that up. It's not what most of you probably think. There were no affairs or betrayals involved. The truth is, we just fell out of love. After we had our second child, our son, we started to drift apart. We did try to fix things. We went to couples counseling, but even that didn't help much. Over time, we had to accept that our relationship had run its course. It was devastating, but staying in a loveless marriage where we hardly spoke anymore wasn't fair to anyone, especially not to the kids. Getting divorced was the better option. Our divorce was surprisingly amicable. I know I've mentioned that the kids had a tough time with it, but I just meant in the normal sense. It was a big adjustment for them. Suddenly, their parents weren't together, and their mom was moving out. That kind of change is hard for any kid to process. That's why I've been hesitant about putting them through a custody battle now. Some of you also asked why we didn't rely on our parents to babysit when the sitter wasn't available. Well, my parents live out in the suburbs, which is pretty far from us, so it's not very practical. As for Tessa's parents, they live out of state, so that's not even an option. There's also been speculation about whether Tessa or I were seeing other people. To set the record straight, I haven't been in a serious relationship since the divorce. I've been on a few casual dates, but nothing significant. As for Tessa, I know she's been dating here and there, but if she's in a serious relationship, she hasn't told me. With everything going on, I doubt she'd admit to it now, especially since her social life and relationships have already created tension between her and the kids. If this does end up in court, that could play a role. Honestly, I'm still not 100% sure what I'm going to do. My friends and family are divided on it, so I've been waiting to hear more opinions before making a final decision. Update 1: After reading through your comments and thinking it over, I've made up my mind. I'm going to go ahead and pursue full custody. No matter how much Tessa apologizes, she can't undo what she did. She's broken my trust, and until she proves that she can prioritize the kids and handle the responsibilities of parenting, I can't share custody with her. Parenting means making sacrifices. I've had to give up plenty of fun times with friends to take care of our kids, and I've never once regretted it. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. But I'm not sure Tessa feels the same way, and that worries me. How can I co-parent with someone if I can't trust her to make the same sacrifices when needed? I keep thinking about the night she left the kids standing at my doorstep so she could go party with her friends. That's not just a mistake, it's a complete failure in judgment. I can't imagine any responsible parent being okay with something like that. It's been 3 days since we last spoke, and today I finally responded to all the messages she's been sending me. I told her I'm sorry for everything, but I won't be changing my mind about seeking full custody. I also told her it's unfair for her to blame me for this situation. If anything, she's the one who created it, and now she has to face the consequences. I also reminded her that if she really believes she's done nothing wrong, she has nothing to stress about. Family court is there to decide what's best for the kids, and ultimately, that's what matters, not what she or I think. Update 2: A few hours ago, I sent Tessa that message about sticking to my decision. Just a little while ago, she replied. She said she's spoken to her lawyer and is ready to fight this in court. She also had some things to say about how, as a woman, she's not allowed to have fun and how mothers around the world have to sacrifice so much more than fathers. She feels it's unfair. Now, I won't deny that in many cases, moms do bear the heavier burden. But that's not what's happening here. I've sacrificed just as much as she has, and I'm far from an absentee father. I've been here for our kids every step of the way, putting them first. At this point, I'm done arguing with her. The court will decide what's best for the kids, and I just hope the outcome is what's truly right for them. I honestly don't understand why Tessa kept trying to play the victim card and dodge any kind of accountability. She seemed to think that her midlife crisis and her constant need for approval from everyone around her were valid excuses for throwing me under the bus for things I hadn't even done. For instance, I've never abandoned my kids to go party with my friends, but she has. It's frustrating because I think she should take a good look in the mirror, reread her own messages, and reflect on her actions instead of projecting blame onto me. But, at the end of the day, none of that matters anymore. We're taking this to court, and I'm letting the legal system handle it. Update 3: Hey, everyone. It's been a couple of months since I last logged in, but I wanted to share some overdue updates with you all. First and foremost, I was granted full custody of my kids. Tessa was given visitation rights, but as of now, she hasn't used them. Honestly, that doesn't surprise me given how things played out. When we went to family court, everything unraveled. The kids had a lot more to say than I initially realized. It turns out Tessa hadn't just been neglecting them, she had also been scaring them into silence. They'd been afraid to tell me what was really going on because they feared the consequences they'd face from her when they returned to her house. And this wasn't a one-time thing, it had been happening ever since she started her new job. When I pressed them gently and encouraged them to speak openly, the truth started coming out. And as it turns out, people weren't wrong about her having an affair. In fact, it was worse than I could have imagined. It wasn't just one man, it was multiple men. It all made sense after hearing from the kids. Tessa's nights out weren't just about hanging with friends. They told me they'd sometimes see her coming home drunk with a guy in tow. On those nights, the sitter would rush to get them to bed early as soon as Tessa came back, but by then, the kids had already seen more than they should have. The things we discovered during the proceedings were deeply disturbing, to say the least. After all the evidence and testimony, the judge made the obvious choice: it was in the kids' best interest to stay with me. Tessa was ordered to get her life in order before she could have any chance at more involvement in their lives. After the ruling, Tessa quit her job and skipped town. From what I know, she's gone back to live with her parents. She hasn't tried to reach out to the kids or me since. The kids have been living with me full-time ever since the custody proceedings began. They seem genuinely happy, and while they do ask about their mom every now and then, they let it go pretty quickly. We're doing well as a family, and I feel like I made the right decision by filing for full custody. No regrets whatsoever.